The departure of Jason Holland does give the opportunity to bring someone else in, but as I say, I just don't know who that person would be.
I find that just unbelievable that at this level that the All Blacks would have guys that are learning on the job.
He had a strategy, and they started well, and they would have been frustrated that they didn't get the ball over the line, but they were denied by some excellent All Black defence in that opening stanza of the game.
DSPN is brought to you by Novus Glass, proud partner of the Special Olympics New Zealand. The Special Olympics New Zealand National Summer Games is in Christchurch, Ōtautahi, this December. Across New Zealand, Aotearoa athletes, clubs, volunteers and families are getting ready, training, supporting each other and celebrating as the flame of hope travels down the country. Text Novus to 3598 to support our athletes. That's Novus, Novus, to 3598 to support our incredible athletes at the Special Olympics in Christchurch, Ōtautahi this December. Notice it, Novus it.
Welcome to the DSPN.
Team New Zealand's in trouble.
Oh, he's done it again, Ricky Herbert.
The Devlin Sports Podcast Network.
DSPN, Martin Devlin, Lachlan War. The navel gauging, the post-mortem is going to continue for a couple of days as well. It should. We've lost 3 times this year, the All Blacks, and all of them have been very humbling defeats. Tony Johnson from Sky Sport calling that at Twickenham, and will be at the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff this weekend. Tony, you've had a good 24 hours to think about it as well, and you're a lot closer to, well, the camp than everyone else is, and so what are your takeaways? But before that, what is the initial impression a day later? How do you wake up and what are you thinking about?
Well, first of all, Martin, there's a sense of deflation about the team. It's undeniable that they really wanted that Grand Slam. If they'd been able to do it, it would have been a significant step forward for this team after what's gone on in the last year and a half to nearly 2 years now. And they got themselves into a situation early on where had they been able to build on it, then I think they would have won the test match. But it wasn't to be. They let England back in the game. England played very well. I think England got their tactics right too. The way they framed their 23 with a very strong bench that included 5 members of the British and Irish Lions tour, and a couple of their very best players held back because of the way they'd seen the All Blacks finish games, close them out the last couple of weeks. So firstly, England after a rough start played really well, but the All Blacks after a good start again just went through that flat patch. I think the warning signs were there before half-time, but certainly after half-time, and so there's no Grand Slam. It's not going to happen, and instead they go to Cardiff, where instead of finishing the job off, there's a different kind of pressure to win the game, and that is to end the year on a winning note. It's not what they wanted, it's not the situation they wanted to be in, but it's the situation they find themselves in.
Tony, what do? We can pick the carcass here, and of course we will do, but as a more relevant question, how do we fix all of this? How do we actually get better? Because it feels so much like a couple of steps forward. As you said, we'd beaten Australia. We were scratchy against Ireland, but we got that win. We had the flat patch against Scotland. We got that. Well, now you just feel like we've been thumped back again.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems is that when something goes wrong, it tends to have a bit of a domino effect. And you look at the things that went wrong, I think it boils down to probably 6 things that happened in the game, 5 of which were controllables. One, if there were injuries to a couple of players, well, that's just unfortunate, and I'll get those out of the way first. Cam Roigard having to come off, and there's no question he was hobbling, at the end of the game. Barrett obviously took some sort of knock early on, had an injury and tried to play through it, but you could tell by half-time where he was really battling to keep it going. So, but the rest of the things that went wrong were manageables, controllables, and they just seemed to compound themselves. So if you go through the 5 or 6 things that happened, covered off the injuries, 2 of them were kicks, penalty kicks, to set up a line out in an attacking situation, which would have given them an opportunity to ram home that good start. One of them, from Barrett's boot, went dead. I think it's probably sometime after that he took the knock, if he hadn't already taken it. And so I think it was Cam Roigard had the second attempt, and that didn't find touch at all. So there's 2 opportunities to build on that good lead and really make England chase the game, but they weren't able to capitalise on that. there were a couple of defensive mistakes, and this team has defended pretty well, with the exception, of course, in Wellington, where they were just completely blown away. But this team showed good connection on defence early on. They denied England after they made a rip-roaring start, counter-punched, hit them with those 2 tries. But then there were 2 defensive lapses in the game. Firstly, the Ollie Lawrence try. Now, Leroy Carter got in off his line to make the tackle. He was there, but he just got himself into a funny sort of angle, and that enabled Lawrence to bounce him off, and his strength did the rest, and he got over for the try. So that's one. You put that down as a defensive error. And then 2, in the second half, that midfield combination, they obviously... The miscommunication was there. They both ended up going for Lawrence, tackling the same guy, which left a gaping hole for Dingwall to score what was a really crucial try in the game. So those were a couple of defensive lapses, and we haven't seen that many of them outside, as I say, that Springbok loss. Then there was the yellow card to Cody Taylor. Now, I've already sort of discussed this with a couple of people, and there's a variance of opinion about it. I said so at the time. I think Marshy said so at the time, that we felt it was harsh because it was the first penalty in the entire game that went against the All Blacks. Now, there's no doubt that it was a penalty, that there were fingertips on the ball, dislodged the ball. You could say that it was cynical, but for that to be a yellow card for the first penalty of the game, I thought that was a bit harsh. It was a call made by the TMO, and I think we saw again in this game there is a determination by the World Rugby referees not to do it the way we do it in New Zealand, where we really do look for, or in Super Rugby, where they look for minimal intervention from the TMO. The edict here is that the TMO must come in if they see something that requires attention, and this is what happened. Marius van der Westhuizen picked it up. So that again, that's a moment that even if you debate whether or not it should have been a yellow card, but it was still a mistake that didn't need to be made, didn't need to happen, because then you put yourselves in the hands of the referees. And that one compounded itself too, because then when they had an opportunity to stick the ball in the corner, it was a strange thing, and we discussed it at the time, but my read of the situation was they didn't want to put the ball into the corner for a line-out, because that meant they would have had to bring someone else, like if they wanted a hooker to throw the ball, and that would have meant that Cody Taylor couldn't have come back onto the field. It did occur, and I think Justin made the comment that, really you should have someone else in the team, be it whether it's a prop or a loose forward, who is capable of throwing the ball into a line-out. But even if they did, they obviously didn't back that situation. Or why didn't they take a penalty shot at goal? Even if it hadn't gone over, it would have at least milked up a bit of Cody Taylor's sin bin time. So, again, a situation where the yellow card kind of led to a domino effect of things. And I think this is the area that this team has got to find a solution to. Now, I'm not a coach and I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but these are the things. The way that either, the flat patches or the way one error kind of leads to another, these have been the bane of this team that stopped them producing a consistent form right throughout the last 2 years. And this has to be addressed if this team is to be successful going forward. I guess it comes down to a combination of things, leadership on the field. And by that, I don't just mean the captain. I mean there should be a core of 4, 5, 6 players who really lead the team. And it also comes down to the coaching off the field as well. And it's something that will have to be addressed because, as I say, those errors that I pointed out, 2 defensive errors, 2 missed kicks for the corner, the Cody Taylor yellow card, and some of the indecision that followed that. I mean, to me, if you removed even 3, 4 of those, if they'd gone the other way, then maybe the outcome of the game could have been different.
Very fair and constructive as always, Tone. When you say the consistency over 2 years, again, this is such a frustration, I think, for a lot of us fans, is that we're just so inconsistent. And you go back to the start of this year where we played France and it was called clunky, and then we turn out a layered turd like that in the second half, 12 tests and 26 tests under Razor's regime, and you produce 3 performances like that this year, which are just So, what we don't expect from the All Blacks. It was interesting. We just had a press conference with him, and one of the questions that I put was, does he retain full confidence in all the assistant coaches? Because, Tone, let's go back to 2022 when Ian Foster had 2 of his guys removed. And that wasn't his idea, but in came Jason Ryan. And Scott Robertson said that, some of these guys are learning on the job. And I find that just unbelievable that at this level that the All Blacks would have guys that are learning on the job. Surely that, I don't know whether or not it's a slip of his tongue or he didn't really sort of understand or know what he was saying when he said it. But if that's actually true, I find that really worrying. And I wonder whether or not we actually, it sounds drastic, but just need a reset now after 2 years with 2 years to go to the World Cup. Not a witch hunt, mate, nothing like that. But just a good, honest look at it and go, who are the right people that we need in these positions? And are these the right people? And if the answer is no, well, we've got to do something about it because we've only got a couple of years to go.
Yeah, well, that was the risk that they took when they appointed a panel where Jason Ryan had been with the previous coaching group, but none of the others had. And that is quite a stark admission, but it's the reality that the most of them are finding out about the different level of rugby that is Test rugby on the job. And so that was the risk that was taken when the group was appointed. Obviously, there's going to be a vacancy coming up with Jason Holland stepping down at the end of the year. And so that begs the question, what do they do now? Do they promote from within, or do they reshuffle roles within, or do they call in someone? And if that's the case, who's available to take that job? And they can probably take look, if the unthinkable happens, and I really do think it's unthinkable, that Wales are probably at the lowest ebb, in a long time, certainly, in my opinion, since probably the late 80s, early 90s, when everything went doolally, and at one stage you had the entire Neath team playing for Wales, which was just absurd.
Right.
But then they...
Good memory.
They addressed the issues there through David Moffat, Graham Henry, Steve Hansen, and they had that reshaping of Welsh rugby, and so they came out of that. But I can tell you that this is the lowest ebb that Wales has been in a very, very long time. And so to me, it's inconceivable that they should lose this game. But it does beg the question now. Sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but what do they do now?
That's right.
Because they wanted, I'm sure, to give the guys who haven't been playing a game this week. But do we go back to what happened last year when they played Italy off the back of the France game? Everyone thought, oh, this will be the opportunity for the guys who haven't had a game, and they didn't. They stuck with a team that was had been the core of the team that had played the previous test, and they looked a bit jaded and really didn't give a particularly great performance in that last game against Italy. So what do they do here? So these are a whole bunch of things that have to be addressed. So suddenly, instead of being the game that put the icing on the cake of a Grand Slam, this now becomes something else, this game here, in terms of the selection and in terms of how important it is for this group going forward if they're to retain the confidence of New Zealand rugby.
Well, again, interesting you say that, because at the presser, the question did obviously get asked to him, and he was happy to admit that there is going to be a lot of changes. The name Ruben Love was thrown at him, and he said, yeah, he's one guy that we need to give a game to, and it just sounded as though Ruben Love is in that team. I don't know what position, but it sounds as though they are going to shuffle it around. And I suppose it's one of those situations, well, you got everything to gain, what have you got to lose, really? And then there'll be a lot of soul-searching at the end after that game over the summer as to exactly what we do. Questions have got to be asked about, are we improving? Have we improved? Why aren't we improving? Those kind of questions. Without, again, it being so myopic about it and just and also so psychotic about it that everything's got to be burnt down and start again, because that's of course how some of the factions of our fandom react to everything. I like Razor. I think he's safe in that job. I don't think there's a question there, but I think it's a valid question to ask about the other guys, because you look for patterns, don't you, Tony? You've had so much experience at this. Do you look for patterns and go, okay, when you've got the same things happening as you've just illustrated, that is a worry. How do you fix those things when they continually come up? Yeah,
well, I suppose the vacancy created by the departure of Jason Holland does give the opportunity to bring someone else in. But as I say, I just don't know who that person would be. The guy that I think most New Zealanders would like to see there, and who I personally feel really should have been in there from the get-go, was Tony Brown. but I think he's otherwise
He
occupied.
ain't leaving where, no.
Yeah, there's been a bit of talk about Ronan O'Gara, who obviously has a connection with, through the Crusaders with some of these guys. So who knows? But I think the timing is right for perhaps a new injection. I don't think anyone else's job is under fire. Just getting back to the selection for this weekend, Marty, while I think of it, obviously the need to give these players an opportunity is there. There's a couple of confounding possibilities there. One is that obviously injuries. So Beauden Barrett, this leg injury that obviously affected him because he wasn't able to take kicks for touch as the game wore on, and then ended up leaving the field. So I would say he'd be out of the reckoning. Cam Roigard, another one who had been playing so well early on when they were asking questions. They were getting the ball into Whainga Nuku's hands. He was making his little snipes around the fringe, keeping them guessing, but then obviously he's taken an injury. So that'll be a factor. But the other thing too is, don't forget, Fabian Holland pulled out of that game. They just said he was unwell. We understand it's like a flu-like illness, and there is a possibility that if he's got it, then you know what happens in team confines. That
it goes through like a dose. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think already there's signs that maybe other people in the touring group have been affected by it, and so that could come into the reckoning as well. So that's a space that we're going to have to watch, although I might be watching it from a social distance because I don't want to get the flu before I get on the plane to come home. But so that all goes into the mix as well. So we'll just have to wait and see. I guess wait until Thursday to find out what shape the team's in, who's fit and who's not, and because that may well also affect who gets to play in this final game.
Also, remiss of me before we go, Tone, not to be absolutely fulsome in the praise of England here. And Steve Borthwick, who copped a lot as coach, 10 wins in a row now. They lost to Ireland at the very first game of the Six Nations. They've beaten France since then. They've gone to Argentina on the road. They've got a massive match with Argentina coming up, and we saw how strong they were with their comeback against Scotland today. And in England's side, they've got their tactics right. And I've read. I know that you don't deliberately. I get on the social media, mate, and I read a lot of just because I just want to see what people are yelling and screaming about. And there's a lack of understanding about what George Ford did in that first half. Let's go back. I referenced yesterday 1999, the semi-final against France, Tony, where we were 14 points up and they got back into the game with a couple of drop goals, and then before you know it, the gap had all of a sudden crunched. I thought that was genius from him, getting into our half and getting something. It was real NFL thinking, wasn't it? When you're down that end of the field, you got to come away with some points. And for him to put himself in a position, and that second one, he was way back, man. That's a big drop goal, that is. That's 40-something yards or 40 metres or something. I thought that was just really good tactics from them. Then, as you say, they had this bench. And look, as much as the guy Pollock is going to absolutely shite everyone that is in the opposition team and fan base, I mean, just what he brought on as well, just that energy and that aggression, and he just is, everything about it. Look, I think that you got to praise England a hell of a lot, and you got to praise Borthwick a hell of a lot. He deserves it, Tony.
He had a strategy, and they started well, and they would have been frustrated that they didn't get the ball over the line, but they were denied by some excellent All Black defence in that opening stanza of the game. Then when the All Blacks scored, they did look like they were at sixes and sevens a bit on defence, because the All Blacks were asking questions of them. The attack was humming really well, and I think had the All Blacks been able to score again, stretch the lead out to 17, 19 points, something like that, then who knows what a different game it could have become. But of course, with those two kicks missing, touch and other things happening, it wasn't to be. Obviously the Lawrence try came about, and then their strategy was clear. They needed to be in touching distance of the All Blacks going into the last 20. They really went all in on this bench, because, as I say, 5 Lions on the bench, including Curry, who's an outstanding... Yeah,
he should be starting. Yeah, great.
And who would normally be an absolute ring-in to start. But then they're pretty well off for loose forwards at the moment, because Sam Underhill is just a phenomenal work rate as a player. Earl, we know he's got that muscular, furious running approach, and they're complemented pretty well by the guys playing blindside flanker, but they also had 3 guys on the bench as well, 3 loose forwards, and there was a risk in that, but it was a risk and reward scenario. So when they get into the final quarter, I think that was their strategy all along. They just wanted to be in touching distance going into the final quarter because they could bring players off the bench to make a difference, put the sort of pressures on that they wanted to. And of course Marcus Smith, I'd give him some credit too, because he's a guy he's had his ups and downs, a bit like George Ford, but I thought he changed the dynamic for England as well when he came on. But definitely they got their tactics right, and part of that whole thing was just staying in touch. Let's not leave empty-handed. And George Ford, he struck those 2 drop goals beautifully. He was also denied a try, of course, because of the intervention of the TMO. Yep. And if we're going to have a go about the decision, yellow card Cody Taylor, we also have to remind ourselves that England were denied a try by the intervention of the TMO, and it was a technical decision, but I guess in order with the law. So, you give England their dues. Get that crowd behind them. They're hard to beat, and it's a place where no New Zealander likes to lose. I don't think anyone likes losing there, but it's a hell of a challenge. And I'll just go back to the point that I've made a couple of times already, Martin. Grand Slams are hard to do. And there's a reason why no one's done it since the All Blacks last did it in 2010. And I think between Australia and South Africa, they've had a combined 4 goes at it, and they haven't done it. And the way this one was framed, with Ireland first, a Scotland team that a lot of people had hopes in second, and England third, there was no let up there. And so, physically very demanding. And I did get the feeling just before half-time, the team looked a little bit fatigued, and I don't know whether that was the result of some injuries or whatever, but it's a hard thing to do. It's hard to win at Twickenham at the best of times, but Grand Slams are hard to do for a reason. That's why there haven't been all that many of them. But England deserve a lot of credit for the way they played, for their game plan, their strategy, the way they rode out an early storm, and the way they struck when they needed to. They deserve a lot of credit for that. It's not just about what the All Blacks failed to do. I think there also has to be some recognition of what England achieved, much as it might hurt a lot of people to do that.
Huge thank you to Novus Glass for sponsoring this episode of the DSPN and for being a proud partner of the Special Olympics New Zealand. This December, over 1,200 incredible athletes, along with hundreds of volunteers, coaches and other support staff, will be making their way to Christchurch or Tautahi for the Special Olympics New Zealand 2025 National Summer Games. Novus Glass is proud to be supporting something special, and you can help support the athletes too by texting Novus to 3598. That's Novus, Novus 3598. Thanks again, Novus Glass, for supporting us here on the DSPN. Windscreen, crack or chip, notice it, Novus it.
DSPN.